Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Lillian Cespedes Gonzalez back with another travel guide where we're visiting different places all across Europe for your convenience and always approaching them from the point of view of sustainable or slow travel. And today I'm taking you to a city that really mesmerized me and I think it surprises a lot of people, which is the beautiful city of Krakow in Poland. Well, today, I think something that is very important and that I need to give you a warning about is, as you can see from the title of the lecture, is you cannot really talk about Poland in general and Krakow specifically without necessarily addressing the subject of the Holocaust and the Shoa. So I will be actually covering in part of this session some details about my visit to Auschwitz. I have only included two pictures for respectful purposes, none of which actually show seriously sensitive material. So, as per usual, my intention with this is not to upset anyone, although, I appreciate this is a very upsetting subject, but it is part of the history of this city, it is part of the history of Poland, and more importantly, it is part of our history that a lot of people keep on denying, and that the way the world is going in this day and age, we're starting to see ripples of. So, as a proud descendant of Jewish people, in this case Sephardic Jewish, but nonetheless the same kind, I feel, as per usual, that it is my duty to put things, on your periphery at very least. But one of the things that I don't necessarily wanted to do with this lecture is just to talk about Krakow and just to talk about the Holocaust. It sort of has been brought to my attention by a lot of people that many visitors go to Krakow and the only thing that they just do is get this insane amount of trauma and misery, as if that's the only thing that ever happened to this city or the people of Poland and the Jewish people, which is not the case. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that these are not important things and we should be talking about them. But at the same time, sometimes we can get a bit blindsided. And just because something is important and we need to be aware of, it doesn't mean that it should be the everything and anything of just one specific place. And, cities, cultures, people are not one dimensional and we should not be just reducing them to their traumatic and dramatic events. So, that's the reason why today, although we will be talking about the Holocaust, I want to take that a step further, particularly because I really hope that when any of you have the chance to visit Krakow, you will actually be able to actually enjoy it for all that it has to offer and not just get a one-sided view of this specific place. That's not the point of slow tourism. That's not the point of sustainable tourism. That's not the point of healthy tourism and history from any perspective. And again, as a historian, well, my duty is that one. Well, before we get started though, a massive thank you once again to all of our sponsors, supporters, and patron on our PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. As per usual, the links are actually in the description if you would like to become one of those lovely people that help us keep on doing what we do so that all of these guides, tours, and talks can be accessible on the internet for free. Then we will be eternally grateful and, we look forward to joining you in our community. And now, without any further ado, let's get down to business. Well, first things first, Krakow, like almost everywhere in the world, and I'm sure you've heard me say this, 1,000 times, if you've been following our channel for some time, is a town that is best explored on foot. I did not take public transport to go anywhere in the actual city once. Everything and everywhere I went was on foot. Granted, I appreciate that some people, due to mobility or health problems, may not be able to do that, or you may have some time constraints. I actually found that public transport in Krakow was not terribly difficult to follow. The bus may have been a little bit intimidating, but otherwise, it should be relatively straightforward and it was very cheap. Like anything in Poland in general, particularly if you're coming from somewhere in Western Europe or the United States, etc., it is actually very affordable. So, the best thing to do is have a nice walk around and actually explore different districts of Krakow itself. And the first one that really you have to is Kazimierz. And by the way, my apologies for my horrible pronunciation of Polish. Polish, in case you don't know, is one of the hardest European languages, and it's definitely not my bag. Well, This district of Krakow was actually created between the 14th and 19th century, and it was actually technically an independent city, just kind of slotted next to Krakow, with a mixed population of Jewish and Polish community. It actually flourished during the period of Kazimierz III, who is also known as Kazimierz the Great, hence the name Kazimierz. And well, in this area, you have actually a lot of interesting places rather than just walking around the neighborhood. What you're seeing just on the screen now is part of the Polish Public Transport Museum. So if you want to, learn more about how that has been going on for some time in the city, it's actually a very interesting museum. And of course, because of its Jewish community, you will find different elements of their culture in here. This is the Stara Synagogue, the old synagogue from the 15th century, which now actually hosts the Museum of Jewish History and Culture. We also have in there the beautiful Basilica of the Corpus Christi, also from the 15th century. And this is a Catholic church, by the way, in this part of town. It's not super big, but inside is very Baroque. It's Baroque, left, right, and center. It's really cool if you're into that type of architectural style. And by the way, free of charge. The vast majority of churches, except the key religious building in Krakow, are free of access. And I would also like to say that the majority of these museums and cultural venues, even when they charge money, again, incredibly affordable. I am aware that even from the point of view of what the standard uh, wage and living average is in Poland, Polish people actually take a lot of immense pride in their culture, something that I don't think a lot of other European countries necessarily give them recognition for. And I would very much encourage you to go to these places. Well, as you walk around the city, and particularly Kazimierz, you're going to notice that there is still a lot of damage from the Second World War, although much of it has actually been restored. You see, the damage was actually done by both the Nazis and the Russians. Honestly, Poland and Krakow specifically just got both horrible ends of the spectrum. But all around the neighborhood of Kazimierz, you will also find scenes that perhaps you have seen before, because it's been used for filming in a fair few occasions, particularly again in films that are related to the Holocaust. And one of the most famous, of course, is Schindler's List. So if you are a fan of the movie, if this is meaningful to you, just walking and breathing the very air of those streets, I think, would be very inspiring and important from the point of view of reflection. Also, and very important if you are someone like me, the best places to eat in Krakow are definitely in Kazimierz. You have lots of street vendors almost in every other corner, which are just wonderful. From any kind of street food you can imagine to more traditional food pieces that have been adapted to be, I guess, eaten, taken away. You have so many restaurants which are both presenting Polish and Jewish cuisine in traditional way, in innovative ways, and again, for a very affordable price. I distinctly remember eating the most wonderful goose with gnocchi that were not necessarily made out of the direct potato dough, but like mash potato. In a restaurant, which I am sure if I were to convert that to the equivalent of, say, London or, a big city in the UK, would have been a pricey and, fancy restaurant. And it literally cost me £30 for the whole meal, including dessert and my drink. It was incredible. Probably one of the best things I've ever eaten. So eat your way through all of Krakow and specifically Kazimierz. Well, the area of Kazimierz is also quite popular because it contains this river, which is Father Bernatecki's bridge, which is adorned with these beautiful acrobatic sculptures over the Vistula River. The Vistula River has lots of lovely areas to walk around the Riviera and over. It has some of the most iconic views of the city as well. So I really suggest that you try to at least cross through different areas just to get those panoramic views. And again, the general disposition of the city really becomes clear once you have gone around the river, because the river very much informs the way that the city of Krakow sort of developed. Well, the majority of the community that you see here now is also Jewish community that are slowly coming back. Most of them were sent to the ghetto of Krakow that was actually just across the river through this direction. And it's a place where you can find a few other memorials. And if you carry on going down this way, you can also go down to Schindler's factory. I actually didn't go to the factory because I was not aware at the time, this was a few years back before COVID, that you needed to book in advance. And it actually tends to sell out. So if you really want to see it, do not make the same mistake that I do, particularly not in this day and age, and book your tickets in advance. Well, this is, like I said, a very important part of the city. Be mindful, be respectful when you walk around here, and more importantly, embrace that beautiful Jewish culture that is coming back to revamp and rebuild the whole neighborhood. But now that we've walked around Kazimierz, let's get down to Old Town, properly speaking, walking towards the area of Rynek Glony, which is the large town square that I think probably most people perhaps recognize with Krakow, where some of the most important monuments are. This whole area is the original settlement from the Middle Ages, and well, the very building you have in front of you is the Gothic brick church from the 14th century of St. Mary's. It's actually one of the best examples of Gothic in Poland, one of the most iconic examples of brick Gothic in Europe, and it's part of the UNESCO listing, like the vast majority of the old town and the castle itself. So again, if you don't necessarily have time to go inside of the church, which to be fair is very pretty, but at the end of the day, you know, I guess I appreciate not everybody has the interest of going inside the churches. At least the area itself is definitely worth the while. It's also an area where a lot of the commercial districts converge into, where a lot of, hospitality venues are around. So definitely one important to be familiar with. Well, back in the day, this was actually one of the largest trading hubs in Europe, because the cloth hall that you're seeing here in the background, and one of the most recognizable monuments in the city, moved so many goods, particularly from the Baltic down into the rest of Europe. It really, really, I cannot emphasize how much wealth actually came through these streets. The area of what is the cloth market itself now has actually some general stores, and you have the tower where you can get up to and see some panoramic views, which are actually really awesome. But as you can see, there is also art installations, cafeterias, etc., etc. It's definitely a very important must sort of visit place. And on certain special occasions and certain days of the week, there is also a market in here with street food, with traditional artisans and vendors. Whenever there are big festivities in Krakow, there is normally a big sort of stage in here for traditional music and or festivals and music of any kind. June, particularly, if you want to experience all of that, is one of the best moments to go, because many of the festivities of the city take place then, and it is, again, free of charge, free culture, amazing music, amazing food that you can just enjoy while engaging with the locals and living and breathing Polish culture. And well, around all the area of the old town, there is also this beautiful place called the Planty Park, which is actually one of the largest parks in Poland. And it was actually put around the whole old town to replace the old medieval walls. So something that people come looking for when they come to Krakow is that kind of, fortified city. It was, but you see, by the period of the 19th century particularly, this was not necessary. The city needed to expand. So the city walls were put down, or at least the majority of them. There are some areas that still remain. And instead, this 52-acre park with 4 kilometers, and that essentially goes around, creates this beautiful green belt around this city. And it's also a location where you're going to find a lot of art, a lot of memorials, statues, monuments, and museums. So if you don't necessarily know where to go, just literally go around the whole Planty Park and you will find stuff. I promise you. And well, it's actually the only section of the city walls that properly gets preserved from that destruction. And this is the Barbican. This is inside the Barbican. The Barbican and over to Florian's Gate. This was part of the fortification that was created in the 13th century, in 12 or after 1241, against the the Mongol attacks. In traditional Polish and Central European history, they are normally referred directly as the Tatars, but they were actually part of the Golden Horde and the Mongol Empire. You see, the convoluted issue here is that by this moment in time, the Mongols owned half of Asia, including some of the northern tribes, which is where the Tatars come from. So, if you're wondering what's the difference and why some of these historical terms are used, indiscriminately, that's the reason why. Well, and yes, by the way, the Mongols made it all the way down here, folks. They were brutal in that regards. Well, during this attack, the vast majority of the city of Krakow was completely destroyed and burned and left in not a very good state of repair. Um, and well, what very little remains of those massive walls that eventually were built to protect themselves from future attacks, like I said, none of them remain anymore besides this area. The Barbican, the day that I actually went to here, had a lovely reenactor. I don't know if you can see the shields at the bottom, who was actually part of a big reenactment group, because Poland is also a country where there's a lot of reenactment, by the way. And I believe he was preparing for reenactment season, which happens normally between July and August, and particularly mentioned the importance of the reenactment of the Battle of Tannenberg, which, if you look into the lectures of this channel, you will actually find a whole lecture dedicated to that specific event, because it was very important for the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth. But I digress. I digress. Now, the area of the Barbican takes you over to Florian's Gate, and this is the view that you get down to Florianska, which is one of the most well-known streets in the city center, full of beautiful local architecture, a lot of commercial stores, and also a lot of traditional restaurants where I actually ate a couple of times. And these also places where you get the cultural experience of traditional Polish folk music and dance with traditional meals. They are, again, really not expensive, incredibly fun, and a nice way of engaging with the community. And as you can see, it takes you back to the area of Rynek, so you cannot really get lost in that regards. And well, this is the area of Florian's Gate, just from the other side. Again, something that you can see in here, and pretty much in all of these different nooks and crannies of the city, is how well spaces are utilized to create, stores for street vendors, legal street vendors, by the way, not shifty, individual artisans, etc., etc., which is frankly very nice. The general free flowing aesthetic of all of these in Krakow is definitely one of the highlights of the city. But one of the things that most people come to do when they come to Krakow, and one thing that, I'm not normally one to say, definitely this monument everyone does go to visit, you have to. In this case, I kind of have to say that. This is a Wawel Royal Castle, which was built by Kazimierz III again, and then it grew over the ages. It is one of the main reasons why the UNESCO listing has been given to Krakow, and it is an incredible complex. You will need the best part of a day in here. I only had 2 hours and a half, and I made the most out of it. There is different tickets depending on what you want to visit. When you come in, make sure that you're taking the right ticket for the areas that you want to explore. I just took the general ticket because I knew I didn't have enough time to see everything. So, for example, I had to skip the cathedral inside. But the grounds are just wonderful. The views that you get of Krakow from the top of the castle are remarkable. And it's just a very interesting place because, as you can see, it's quite eclectic in terms of its aesthetic. But one of the reasons why a lot of people actually come to the I'll say it, to the castle is because it contains one of the largest and most diverse art collections in this part of Europe. It drags an insane amount of people over this way. I think it's the best part of 2 million visitors every year because of simply the art collection. And if you're an art lover like me, then you know what I'm gonna say. You have to do it. Well, like I said, the castle is grown over the period of the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and Baroque mostly, so you get a nice mix of them all. You have the fortified complex, which includes, like I said, the cathedral, where the Polish monarchs are actually buried, or at least many of them, because one of the reasons why Krakow, without being the capital nowadays, because that's the privilege of Warsaw, is so important for Polish history, is because it used to be the royal capital. until 1596. And even after that, it still remained the center for academic development and culture. So that is really why it has such an importance in the world of history, in the world of traveling. In fact, it was the very first proper or one of the very first UNESCO listings in history because of the state of conservation and the importance that it has as a place, just so you can understand what I mean by that. Well, the grounds honestly are enormous. Do not underestimate the amount of time it's going to take you. The castle itself, as well, for the locals, for the citizens, has always been a symbol of endurance, even in times of occupation. So in many ways, this is the ultimate, I guess, iconography of what it's like to be from Krakow. And although the castle actually dates from the 14th century, we think there have been buildings here that were done earlier, which is actually quite remarkable. So there is, ongoing excavations and ongoing research that affects the castle itself. So a very exciting place. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the state rooms, the private apartments, the exhibitions, the royal gardens, la, and then, of course, the Dragon's Den. There is actually a set of sort of little underground passages, caves, whatever you want to call them, in the base of the hill where the castle is set, that lead you to this statue, which, by the way, actually breathes fire, which is indeed the Dragon's Den, because there is a popular legend of the dragon commemorated in the castle. Supposedly, you see, a dragon lived in the area. It was terrorizing the community, and the hero Krakus, which is the reason why the city is called Krakow, actually came to slay the dragon and founds the city in the very spot where all of that happens. So the dragon needs to be paid homage and, enjoyed by all members of the public, young or adult. And then after you visit the castle itself, particularly if you have good daylight hours on you, I very much recommend you don't head straight back to the old town, and instead you walk across. There's a bridge crossing, as you can see, just outside of the castle. There is a few boats on the riverbank, and then the bridge from where I literally took this picture. You walk over to the area of Boulevard Poleski, which is essentially the Polish boulevard, on the other side, where you will get the views of the castle, the views of the Vistula, and a beautiful green area for cycling, for skating, for walking around, for literally just chilling. There were so many people with just picnics, books, etc., really just enjoying the peace and quiet that often is so difficult to find in these big cities. And well, here you see a different view, the cyclists, the many cyclists of the castle, of the general area. Honestly, truly charming. Well, now I would like to recommend a couple of days out of Krakow. And by the way, yes, of course, this is the moment where I will be talking about the Holocaust. And, I'll give you a heads up when we're actually talking about Auschwitz. But before Auschwitz, one thing that I very much recommend you go and do in Krakow is visiting the salt mines in Wieliczka, which have actually been producing salt since the Neolithic era. And, well, as an actual mine, they were already excavated in the 13th century and were operative until 1996, if I remember correctly. They are actually one of the oldest salt mines in the whole world. So just with those details, you should probably be thinking, wow, that's awesome. They are also a UNESCO heritage site for obvious reasons. And again, definitely book the tickets in advance, because you have two ways of doing the visit. You can either do it with a guided tour, which is what I did, or you can just do the museum route. There are some parts of the visit that are communal, some parts that are not. Either way, Wieliczka gets really, really crowded from people that come by bus. The Vistula sometimes has some little cruise ships. Of course, Krakow has a big airport. It's not far away from any other areas in Poland. It's very well connected. So the buses come and ram the place. Book your tickets in advance. And if you're experiencing a heat wave in Krakow when you arrive, is the place where you're going to be coolest, because you need to go underground. Keep this all obviously in mind for people that may have problems like claustrophobia, etc. But I was at 36 degrees the day that I took this tour, and I couldn't have been more grateful for how cool it was instead inside of the mine. Now, the mine is not in the city center of Krakow, not even really in the direct outskirts. So the best way, if you don't have direct transport to do that, is to book one of those sort of transfer tours packages that give you the skip the queue type of ticket and that take you directly to the site and that will bring you back to Krakow itself. They normally depart from nearby the area of the castle, so it's not an area that will be very confusing for people who are not familiar with the town. So in that regards, they make it generally very, very easy. And of course, if you go with private ones and whatnot, you will have a pickup from your hotel or wherever you're staying. Well, this is 372 meters, I believe it is, down, and about, no, sorry, kilometers, and about 278 in extension. It's insane in that sense, really, really big. You're not gonna be obviously walking the 278. That would be too much. Like I said, it's just a section that lasts about approximately an hour and a half, give or take. They have all sorts of things in there. You have underground lakes, you have different shafts that you're shown. Obviously, the salt is literally everywhere. There are sculptures and there are chapels like the one that you see right here. This is probably one of the most extraordinary things I've seen in my life. An entire chapel, which is actually used as a wedding venue more than once or twice, several meters underneath the ground, in what is essentially a salt shaft. It's incredible. I cannot emphasize that enough. The uniqueness of this facility is remarkable. And although there are other salt mines in the world that maybe you can explore, like I said, the fact that it's one of the oldest, the fact that it's been going on for such a long time, and that it is actually being an active mine until very, very recently, I think makes this place very special. And well, unfortunately, guys, this is the moment where I need to rip off the band-aid. So I only, like I said, have two pictures of Auschwitz and, well, Auschwitz-Birkenau. They're gonna be pretty much still for the next few moments. If you don't want to listen to this, I suggest you skip the next 5 minutes or so of the talk. Well, I always have to take a very deep breath to talk about this. It was a very intense situation. I really cannot emphasize that enough. And I guess one of the things, first of all, that I want to say is you don't get a badge of honor for going to visit Auschwitz. It's definitely not compulsory to go to a concentration camp. I know there are people who simply, they would not be able to withstand the genuine emotional labor that it is. This is not like just walking into any other museum or a, war site. It's seriously gut-wrenching. Now, you can visit Auschwitz on your own. I would not recommend you do that. I'm always very happy to tell you to go at your own pace. Not here. It's a little bit of a labyrinthic complex, first of all. It's important that you see certain things in a certain order, to not miss details, to not miss context. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's dive into it. So first things first, the site of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which by the way is the full name of the site, is both a museum and memorial. It was the largest of all concentration and extermination camps during the Nazi regime. Over 1.1 million people lost their lives here. Let that sink in for a moment so that you can appreciate what you're actually going to see here. Why is it important that you go with a tour guide? There is a lot of information, particularly in the museum area, but like I said, for the sake of navigating the place, it is important. Secondly, I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed. I'm talking about personal experience, and I'll explain why in a few moments. The tour guide is there to also make sure that you don't collapse and have a nervous breakdown, which has happened before and may happen again in the future. It's as much as it is health and safety as it is making sure you're actually getting the details and fully understanding what happened here. I'm sure many of you have read books. I'm sure many of you have seen the movies. It is not the same. It is not the same. Hearing it and seeing it than being there and learning on the spot how it happened. Period. So, get yourself a guide. There are many different ways. There are also many different tickets and visits that you can do in Auschwitz depending on the length that you have. Something else. You can get to Auschwitz through public transport. There is a little bit of walking to get to the entrance of the museum, but just like with Wieliczka, I very much recommend that you get a tour that includes the transfer. And the reason for that is not even the getting there, is the coming back. If you are an average human being with the average sense of emotional sensitivity, emotional availability, emotional anything, if you're human and acting in a humane way, by the time you leave this site, you will feel like a bus has run you over. You will really not have your bearings, okay? Grabbing public transport may become an ordeal and you will be tired. It's not a long day in the sense that it's not really a long visit. You can make it long, of course. The traditional visits last a couple of hours, something like that. But you will feel like the whole weight has been dropped on you. And if you are on holiday, you may not necessarily want to add extra to the ordeal after what you experience. So, word of advice. Well, and of course, book your tickets in advance. Very important. You can buy them on the day, but it's better if you do it in advance and you mentally prepare yourself for it. Like, don't expect to do anything else the day that you go to Auschwitz. Sincerely, don't. And make sure that you have a light breakfast. Well, I literally did everything I could do at the time when I visited Krakow. The way that the site has been revamped since COVID has created some different ways of touring. But I did everything that I could in there. Normally, the visit includes two halves of the camp, Auschwitz itself and Birkenau. And there is a difference in both camps. The installations are different, the history is different, the feeling, everything. Another thing to mention, there are very strict and important rules to follow while you're visiting this site. Just like I said, a similar comment, and the rules were not as strict in our previous travel guide in Budapest about Dohányi Street Synagogue. Yeah, please be on your best behavior when you come to a place like this, and consider that, unlike exactly the same way in Dohányi Church, this was a site for extermination of human beings, just like you and me. And not just Jewish, by the way. Polish, any other ethnic minority you can imagine, particularly Roma, members of the LGBTQ plus community, political dissidents, religious dissidents, etc., etc. Of course, there is a big emphasis on the Jewish extermination because that is what part of the camp was created to do specifically, but there were many other people who were incarcerated, forced into laboring here, and then killed by the conditions of the camp and, well, by the regime itself, just for being different. Just, again, this is not just about the Jewish Holocaust, it's about the general extermination of human beings by simply differing from what one person or a specific group of people believed to be the absolute norm. Well, a little bit of history on the site. The site was actually established in 1940. It started because of the mass arrests that were going on in Krakow as a result of the Polish resistance. People do not give Poland enough recognition. The Polish people fought fiercely for their country, for their freedom, and for that of the rest of Europe. It's just they were the first victims, in many ways, after the Germans, of a horrible string of atrocities that will completely, result in incredible amounts of nasty things. But many of them, and I'm talking of mass arrests, there will be mass villages, towns, etc. They will be arrested. And these were not necessarily Jewish people, I insist. These would be people simply against the Nazis, against the occupation, against anything. They were mass deported here and made prisoners of the camp. And from 1942, 2 years later, it will also become an extermination camp for Jewish people. As a result, the camp needed expansions, and those expansions were built by the very prisoners. In fact, the Jewish extermination camp was built by the Polish prisoners that were already there, that were forced to make that happen. Many of the Polish people were not necessarily forced into mass extermination, just into direct slavery. They knew they were building the weapons of mass destruction for members that had been part of their community. Because although the history of integration of the Jewish faith and people of Jewish background into many other places all across the world hasn't always been smooth, Poland, throughout its many troubles and its many historical issues, has always been one of the most tolerant countries on that regards, ever since the Middle Ages, even since the wars of religion. It was really not a problem for them overall. So imagine how that must have felt for the people building that. Well, the Polish camp is Auschwitz I, and then Auschwitz II is the Birkenau expansion, which is the largest part of the complex because this is what becomes the extermination site. There was a third part, which was actually full of smaller subcamps in the area, and the majority of the tours don't necessarily take you to the third camp. You just go through Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II. Why is this a big difference? Because although facilities, barracks, etc., look similar on both the crematoriums and the gas chambers, which you do walk through. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, obviously, but the tour takes you through them intentionally. They go through them, and it's not the same. The facilities that you will find in Auschwitz I than in Auschwitz II. It's really not the same. And this is where I had my absolute freak out. Okay, so I'm gonna level with you guys, be 100% real. Look, the day I went to Auschwitz, it was at the end of June. It was really hot. We were at 35 degrees. I normally deal with the weather okay. It's a dry heat in Poland, and if you don't get baffled by the heat, that's fine. Now, this was literally at the end of the tour. I had, by some miracle, gotten through the museum, seen the shoes, the hair, the luggage, the prosthetics, all of that. I got through it. I went through Auschwitz once and understood, all of the different bits and pieces. Okay, I walked through the gas chambers, through the crematorium. I almost felt like I was sleepwalking, by the way. I'm not entirely sure I was fully there. I think it felt like some kind of out of body experience. And then my tour specifically, which was on a private tour, ended back at the Polish quarters of the women, which is what you're seeing here. This is where those women actually, I was going to say live, but I existed. And I started hearing about, as a woman, as their health problems, as their periods, as their illnesses. And it was personal up until that moment in time. I came here because of my ancestral heritage and also because I'm a historian and I wanted to really see this. But then it literally got to the very nature of human condition. And as a woman, hearing all of that in that space, in that environment, with the heat, I simply could not handle it anymore. I had to go out for air and I nearly fainted. I literally was pretty much in recovery position, okay? I'm not saying that to scare you guys. I'm saying that to help you understand that I was fully prepared. I had come to this intentionally knowing exactly what was going to happen. And it still happened. Because it's a very serious thing and something very difficult to digest. And that's the reason why I've kept the visuals to a minimum, because literally just thinking about it, I do get a small anxiety right on my chest right now, which you may even hear through the microphone. Is it worth the visit? 100% yes. I will never regret doing this. Do I think I will ever be able to do it again or go to another concentration camp? Because, some other concentration camps had different features like the medical facilities in Dachau, etc. No, never again. I think I could put myself through this experience. It was one of the most brutal things I've experienced in my life. And once was important and I'm glad I did it. Two, I'm not sure I could. So that's the reality of how experiencing something like that it was. The ride back to our hotel, because we went straight to the hotel, didn't go somewhere else. It was the middle of the day. We got back at around 4 o'clock. I did not leave my room until 8 p.m. that day, literally just crawled into bed and stayed silent. The ride back on the car, it was six of us, I think, yeah, six of us sharing the car. Nobody said a word. No one. And I was with at least a couple of very chatty young people from the United States. No, nobody uttered a single word. We were all literally perfectly silent. Most of us looking through the windows, not even sleeping. It's not because the car suddenly, went completely shut down that way. No, it was sincerely a big shock. Now, as you know, I don't like ending things on a bad end. And like I said, Krakow is not just about the Holocaust. So let me tell you about the beautiful many museums that they have in the city. And museums that, by the way, give very different points of perspective. So I would like to invite you to actually really, really engage with these museums because I probably found them to be the most fun part of the experience besides being out and about with the locals. The insane amount of information these museums actually give in more than one or two languages because all the information is obviously in Polish and in English. Often you find it in German, in Russian, in many others. It's quite remarkable. I've not seen many museums in Europe to have this ease and access of language. So, kudos in that regard. Well, the first museum that I've actually put in here, I guess to ease up our transition from Auschwitz to something else, is actually um, the uh, the Museum of the Gestapo. This is in Pomorska Street Museum, and this is the area that the Gestapo took over to make it their headquarters during the occupation. It is actually a very interactive museum. As you can see, this is just part of the room where they have electronic devices, different ways into actually engage with the history, stories of the victims of the Nazis, and also stories of the victims of communism. Because I must emphasize this, we often focus so much on the destruction of the Nazis. For Poland, it wasn't just that. They thought that they were finally free, and then the communist regime arrived, and it was essentially part two of what they just had had. It's just we don't often talk about it enough. And they do talk about it extensively in here. It was very, very, very hard. So, they talk about all of these different stories. You can actually pull up some of the specific files from some of the people who were detained. And at the bottom, if you don't necessarily have time for Auschwitz, but you want to engage with this part of the history and get personal, they actually have the Gestapo cells. These are actual graffiti by the people who were incarcerated in there. I did obviously not make this up. This is literally just what you see. Not as intense, but definitely another moment of heart wrenching. There is only 3 cells. Um, yeah, if you don't have time, this is a kind of I guess crash course to get introduced to what the occupation of one regime and the other was for people in Poland and Krakow specifically. Well, not all is doom, gore, and misery. You know me, I like me a good art museum. And I really cannot emphasize this enough. The National Museum of Poland has many different branches in Krakow. You have to be very strategic because all of the museums are incredibly good. Some of them are very, very innovative. And this one is the European branch, the Museum Stanislawa Wyspius. I think that's how it's pronounced, or Bispayans. I'm not sure. But in any case, the European branch of the art museum in here. Lots of art from different time periods. This is a classic Peter Bruegel the Younger, the sermon of St. John the Baptist from the 1600s. And here you have this beautiful bust of a lady with a hat done at around the year 1900 by Emilio Fieschi. So, culture, left, right, and center. It was completely dead, by the way. I was the only person who was in there. Granted, I was there at 10 a.m., but nonetheless. Now, there is the Archaeological Museum of Krakow, which again was very, very empty. I went during lunchtime, but I was the only human being in there. Absolutely wonderful collection of exhibits. It has a part of the museum that is a bit more classical in the sense of antiquarian sort of style, particularly with their displays. But as you move through the rooms, you start seeing facilities that come to life with different elements of reenactment, going all the way from prehistoric communities to up to the Middle Ages in Poland specifically, not just Krakow. And it's actually also a very modern museum. Like in the same way that they have the old bits, you have all of these interactive screens right in front of displays that really bring to life the different history episodes of Poland and Krakow specifically as a city. I really found it to be a very cool museum, and it didn't cost me. If it was €5, it already sounds like a lot of money, guys. And speaking of, technologically impressive museums, this is part of the display at the Rynek Underground Museum. So in the very square of Rynek, going downwards, you will find the original medieval settlement, the traces that were left from the desolation of the Tatars slash Mongols, whatever you want to call them. In fact, as you can see, this was a massive audiovisual display of how the city gets taken over and the different situations and problems they had in there. It was so cool. This one, I think, was perhaps one of the most expensive ones, and it was like 10, €15. Again, not a lot of money. All about the past of Krakow, the remains that are underneath the current city level, which honestly is also a very interesting way of exploring a museum because you don't often find a lot of museums underground. It doesn't feel claustrophobic though. It's a bit low in light, of course, for obvious reasons, but the space is incredibly ample and wide. You don't really notice that you're underground, unlike, for example, in the salt mines when it's very obvious because you have to go a long, long way down in that regards. And well, it's really such a big place. I actually had to come back a second time because I did not have enough time to actually get through it. It was one of those things where I, based on what they had on the website, on tourism information, etc., I thought, okay, this museum is going to take me maybe an hour, hour and a half. I spent 2 hours and a half, nearly three. I went there for an hour and a half the first day and an hour and a half the second day. And it was great because that's the other thing. The pass was actually available for like several days in a row, which was wonderful. Do not, take value away from this wonderful museum. And again, really spend time in the lovely museums that the city of Krakow has to offer. It has been an academic center for hundreds of years for a reason. Engage with that. And well, we are effectively coming to the end of this travel guide today. So I guess I'll summarize some very important points before I leave you. Seriously, go to those museums. Seriously, do plan your visits, particularly depending on which times of the year you're going. Consider that the climate in Krakow gets really warm in the summer, but also very cold in the winter, and winter hours are different from summer opening hours. They had actually a very extensive late opening hours during the summer, going all the way to 7, 8 p.m. So make the most out of your day to also avoid hours of highest heat. Engage with the local community. I appreciate that if you are not very used to Polish culture or you've never heard Polish in your life, it can sound really intimidating. It is an intimidating language. Do not get me wrong. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. And I appreciate that maybe from a cultural perspective, Polish people and in general central groups of people getting closer to the Baltic and Central Europe can come across as maybe a bit direct, blunt, or standoffish. They are honestly very helpful people. They will genuinely take care of you. They will welcome you into their community and their, you know, city as long as you are also willing to accept their side of the story and their way of doing things. As usual, wherever you go, be respectful of the fact that just because your culture is one way, it may not be that way where you are. That doesn't make it better. That doesn't make it worse. It just simply makes it different. And if you really open yourself to their way of being and learn a couple of words, even if it's just to say hi or whatever, I promise you they will be incredibly grateful and very, very kind to you. Again, make sure that you bring some local currency. Zloty is actually very easy to buy in the vast majority of currency exchanges in Europe and particularly in some other places, like, for example, the United States, Canada, and even some Asian destinations. So keep that in mind. Although I found that most places took card, the majority of the museums took card payments, except the very little ones. And of course, the tours that you book in advance are prepaid. So do not feel the need to bring bucket loads worth of cash to Krakow. And again, come with the idea that whether you are actively looking for it or not, The Holocaust and Jewish history is very important in this country and in this city. Even if you avoid it, you will come across it eventually. This is not about overwhelming you with history. It's also not about making you upset. It's about not erasing the damage and acknowledging it. It's about accepting what happened, learning from it, and moving on, even if that is uncomfortable, even if that makes us panic and go into recovery mode. Okay? No one is judging you. I promise you are not the first one. You will not be the last. But most importantly, engage with the local thriving culture of the city. Krakow is too beautiful not to get lost in it, not to let their wonders fascinate you. Even if you don't come with a plan, just submerge yourself in it. Throw yourself into the melee. Explore like a kid that genuinely has just, discovered their favorite new toy. And you will come out of this town transformed. I have no better words to say but transformed. I came out of this city not wanting to go back home. Sincerely, I was almost crying on the airplane, and I only spent a very short period of time. I ate delicious, wonderful food, which is obviously the way to my heart. Make sure you get fresh pierogi as you're in the city center. Do not miss them. Um, I came out having met some very lovely people. I came out having listened to wonderful music in almost every single corner of the city. I did go to a Chopin recital that cost me £10 and where they gave me 2 glasses of champagne by a, prodigy from the area. But even if you don't do that, there were harpists coming out of the Barbican, the cultural festival, the show with dinner. Music is a very important part of Polish culture. Enjoy it, embrace it. See the art, see the literature, see all of those places that mean something to people, and it will genuinely transform you. And on that note, I hope that I've not made you too upset with our heavy talk today. But if I did, well, you're not alone. Do not use that sadness as a way of letting it corrupt you. Embrace that sadness as the fact that you're human and you understand that sometimes history is that uncomfortable. And for as long as you know history is that uncomfortable, you will be making the world a better place. Because if it makes you uncomfortable, you will make sure it doesn't happen again, which at the end of the day, it's what this all is about. So, thank you so much for spending some time in here with me, guys. I will be coming back with another travel lecture very soon. We have many other live tours and talks. So thank you for your support as usual. The links for PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee are there. Take care of yourselves. Have a lovely day. And remember, just because you're different, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. And they cannot exterminate us all. Take care of yourselves.